Hello and welcome to the previews of Outlaws of Junction. I will only show you what you need to know about these reveals. There will be no spoilers per se, there will be only the original reveals. And in order to give you only what you really need, I have made a big set of items, that we will go through. Starting with just my favorite card. A weird one this time, it's Frontier Seeker. And why is it my favorite? Because it sort of helps you get lands into your hand, which is weird coming from a white card. So I think this will improve the game a lot. Let me know what your favorite card of these will be. And also stick around until the end or skip to it if you want, because there will be a little treat. Next up, the cycle of life. I will be going over the cycles because I think they will be really interesting. One of them is the joins up cycle. For example, we have the character Tiny Bones that is showing up in the crew, and it says when it enters any number of target players, discard a card. And then every card from this cycle says whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, you do something. In this case, any number of target players mills a card and loses 1 life. And in the case of Vraska joins up, it will be that you get to draw a card whenever a legendary creature deals combat damage to a player. This also means that the legendary theme will be a deck that we will see more of in this set. And the fun thing about this one is that we will see the legendary creatures of the team of Oko, of course. Next up, we have Dug Up Gems. These are returning cards that have been printed before and that have a little bit of a higher price tag. For example, Mana Drain, which will be very interesting to many of you because at this point it will be around $60 when you get it. It is of course a really well-known card, so no need to get into it really. Next up, we have these lands. These are the lands that say when they enter tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands. So if you play them really quickly, they will be really good. This is a little bit of a less high price tag, but these lands can go up to $18. So really fun. Also really nice that they have made this panorama art because that makes it really awesome. Also, don't you think it's weird to go through all 5 colors of mana in just such a short time? And also note in the art, which I think is really cool, is that these horses are running alongside the train. Now next up is the mythic moment, because I will show you all the mythics that are going through, especially since these will be the really complicated ones. For one, we have Final Showdown, which also shows us a new mechanic, which is Spree, which lets you choose 1 or more additional costs. So from 1 mana, you get to cast the instant, it does nothing. But you have to pay the extra mana. So for example, if you pay +1 mana, all creatures lose all abilities. If you pay another mana, you get to choose a creature and give it indestructible. And then if you choose +5 mana, destroy all creatures. So for 7 mana you could do all, and you get to choose. This mythic moment is really interesting, I think, because this is a board wipe for 6, which is a little bit more expensive, but it really shows you what the card can do. You can, for example, pay 7 if you have really annoying abilities from your opponents. For example, you could give something indestructible, or of course you could choose to give one of your own creatures indestructible. Now, this is a really interesting thing, I think, because Jace Reawakened is a 2-mana legendary planeswalker that says you can't cast spells during your first, second or third turns of the game. This says that you get to draw a card, then discard a card. That's just a very Jace ability. It then says you may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted, which will be a new mechanic that we explain later. But I think the most fun part about this is that, or a new part, is that you can't play it during your first, second or third turns of the game. And I think this is because getting to plot a card means that you get to play it for free later. So that will be really interesting. Next up we have Gisa, which is a sort of lord for skeletons and zombies. It gives them +1, so it's really a lord. But she also gives them menace, which is of course an evasive ability that not many zombies have. There are some ways to give them flying, but then you go into blue-black, so on a mono-black card this will be really interesting. Other than that, she says when you commit a crime, which means to target something from your opponents, you create 2 tapped 2/2 zombies, or basically just zombies. You only get to do this once each turn, but could also do this on your opponent's turn, of course. Next up, we have Torpor Orb, which is a reprint, but I mostly wanted to show you the flavor here. It says devour the hope of a world and it will bow before you, which is a Fomori inscription, which are the old people of Thunder Junction, who lived there before the Omen Paths opened up. And it's really interesting to see how their culture was, because it seems to be really bleak and dark. So whatever is in there is really powerful, but also really dangerous. Then we have Callan the Kid. We know him from the story as well, of course. 3 mana, 3/3 with flying and lifelink. Really strong already, but it is in 3 colors. But then whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, so from exile for example, you may cast a permanent spell with equal or lesser mana value from your hand. This means that you can sort of storm off a little bit. But if you don't, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, so in any case you get to ramp. Of course, the color combination means that you are in a creature heavy deck probably, but you are also in a very rampy deck, and maybe a controlling deck as well. Gitrog, the Ravenous Ride, also shows again a new mechanic, but this one is a 5 mana 6/5 with trample and haste already. So it does get in really quickly. Then it has Saddle 1. This means that you get to sort of crew the Gitrog, while the Gitrog can attack on its own. When you crew it, it gets another effect, or when you saddle it. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that saddled it this turn. So you do have to saddle it then. So you tap the creature with at least 1 power. When the Gitrog then deals combat damage to a player, you get to sacrifice that creature. This is interesting, I think, because you do show what creatures you have saddled the Gitrog with. If you do sacrifice a creature, draw X cards, then put X land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So if you do get a lot of cards into your hand, which you can do with the Gitrog as well, and you can put a lot of lands into play again, this really works well with all the previous Gitrogs as well. Annie Flash, the Veteran, has Flash, of course, a 6 mana legendary. When she enters, if you cast it, return target permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That is really interesting because that can be really strong already. Whenever she becomes tapped, you also exile the top 2 cards of your library and you may play them. So this seems like a really strong sort of commander. Maybe you want to get her into the battlefield more often, but that's really hard to do. Because you do need to cast her, so you can't really blink her in that way. So yeah, I don't really think this will be immediately a big commander, but maybe if you can tap her over and over, you can keep exiling cards. That could be strong. Then we have Rakdos the Muscle, a 5 mana card that's all about sacrificing, of course, because it is still Rakdos. 5 mana 6/5, again with flying and trample. This seems really strong. Whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile cards equal to its mana value from the top card of target player's library, could also be someone else. Onto your next end step, you may play those cards. That is really strong. Then when you sacrifice another creature, or you can sacrifice another creature to give Rakdos indestructible. You do have to tap it then, and you can only do this once per turn. So it isn't a sacrifice outlet immediately, but you can sacrifice one creature that's pretty strong and steal a lot of cards from your opponents already. This seems like a really fun commander, I would say. Then we have Vraska the Silencer, a 3 mana 3/3 with Death Touch. The pain doesn't stop. Really strong in the Death Touch deck, I would say, in standard as well. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, you may pay 1 and you can steal the creature. Basically, it does become a treasure artifact with tap it to sacrifice it, and it loses all other card types. But one thing it doesn't say is that it loses all abilities. So do with that what you will. We go on to our next theme. We've had the mythics, which are already really strong, but I have some other sleeve-worthy picks. For example, Insatiable Avarice has become really popular, I think. Really cool art as well, with a coin in an eye. It has Spree on it, so you can choose 1 or 2 of these abilities. For 1 mana, it does nothing. For a black and 2 mana, you get to search for a card from your library, put it on top. And then for 2 black mana on top of that, you can draw 3 cards or have another player draw 3 cards and that player loses 3 life. This means that for 5 mana you have a tutor and you draw 2 more cards on top of that. But you could also for 3 mana draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. So it is really versatile on top of that. So that's why I think it's really sleeve worthy at least. Then we have Make Your Own Luck. Does need a lot of mana, 5 mana, but then you look at the top 3 cards and you may plot a card. A plotted card, it says here, you may cast it as a sorcery on a later turn, so not this turn, without paying its mana cost. So you need a turn rotation, your opponents might know that it comes, but they don't necessarily know when. So that's a really cool concept about plot as well. Then we have the Colossal Rattleworm, a 4 mana creature, and I think this is sleeve worthy. It's just a 6/5 with trample, okay, basically. But the 4 mana 6/5 with trample goes in some mono green stompy standard decks already, I think. But it also has flash as long as you control a desert. So if you can make it a desert deck and maybe mono green or something, then you have a really fast, strong 6/5, and maybe it even goes in the flash deck in that way, in an any flash deck maybe even. On top of that, you also get to exile it from your graveyard and you can search your library for a desert and put it onto the battlefield tapped. That can happen around turn 5. If your opponent answers the big monster, you still get to have a new land, which is still a strong effect. Then I have this one, the Key to the Vault. There are a few more. But the Key to the Vault is a 2 mana equipment and it will be equipped for 3 mana. And then whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, look at that many, so equal to the amount of damage you did. Cards from the top of your library, you may exile a non-land card from among them, and there it comes. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost, which is really strong if you have a big things deck. So for example in the blue-black ninjas deck, this will be really strong. And then I think last one is the Freeze Strider Lookout, a 3 mana human rogue that is already a 3/3 with reach, really strong bodies. And whenever you commit a crime, so whenever you target something from your opponents or your opponents, you look at the top 5 and you may put a land card onto the battlefield. This isn't always a ramp effect, but it is really often. And that does mean that you get to ramp off really quickly, I would say. Alright, next theme, ongoing narratives. This theme is all about, the stories or the characters that have returned from previous sets. Like Crom, which is from Innistrad, and it's really interesting to see back here. You will read the flavors for these, I think it's the most important, and maybe look at the art. But not much has changed here, I would say. The flavor says, concerned for his apprentice's welfare, Ludovic sent his greatest creation to make sure Geralf got into the right kind of trouble. So he still wants him to get into trouble, but I think it's really cute that Ludovic sent his greatest creation, which he's really proud of, to help Geralf. I think that's really cute. Then we have Magda, the really overpowered card usually, has been toned down a little. Still a 2 mana 2/2, but when you commit a crime, you create a tapped treasure token and you only get to do this once each turn. So you can do it on your opponent's turns. You sacrifice 3 creatures, you just get a 4/4 with flying and haste. So no searching your library for dragons anymore, but still a strong card, and you will be really happy with this in draft. Maybe if you have a committed crime deck. Now, I have a little bit of a Palette Cleanser, which is the commander decks that have been revealed, or at least the face commanders have been revealed. So 4 of them. First up is Gonti with black, green and blue. He makes the cards you cast but don't own, so the ones you steal from your opponents, 1 less to cast. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library, exile it face down, so your opponents don't even get to see it, like Gonti does, and you may play it for as long as it remains exiled. So basically a Gonti steal your opponent's card with a few added colors. Then we have Yuma, the Proud Protector, which is a Naya land card, sort of. Basically about deserts, probably. It costs 1 less to cast for each land card in your graveyard. So you will need to mill the cards. And whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may sacrifice a land, and if you do, draw a card. This gets more lands into your graveyard, so I hope you have a way to get them back onto the battlefield as well. But you do get new cards, so maybe there's lands among them. Whenever a desert card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, so also when they are sacrificed, you also create a 4/2 with reach on top of this 6/6 body, of course. Then third, we have Stella Lee, a wild card, a blue and a red spellslinger commander. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, so you need to cast 2, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn you may play it. This means that you have your third card, which you need for a tap ability. It says copy an instant or sorcery spell, but you can only activate this if you cast 3 or more. So if you have only spells in your deck left, this will really help you get the third spell cast, and then you can perhaps copy it as well. Then we have Olivia, who we all know from the Crimson Vow set. Or perhaps you've known her for longer, also possible. A 4 mana flying lifelink 3/3. So not a big body, but still flying lifelink, can swing a bit. But she grows. Whenever 1 or more outlaws you control deal combat damage to a player, you create a treasure. And outlaws are a collection of 5 creature types: assassins, which Olivia is, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks. Then if you sacrifice 3 mana, if you sacrifice 2 treasures, you put 2 +1 counters on each creature you control. Not only the outlaws, but I think you will want only outlaws in this deck, or mostly. But you do get to grow them, and then you at least have a 5/5 flying lifelink. Next up, last thing about these reveals is a new way to play Commander, in a way. The bounty cards. These say that before the game you can shuffle a pile of at least 6 unique bounties. Then from the moment the third player started his turn, you reveal the top bounty card. So the first player to start the game does have another benefit. You claim the revealed bounty when you fulfill this thing. For example, at the beginning of your end step, if you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you collect your reward. And the rewards will go up from creating a treasure, creating 2, or drawing a card, or doing both of those things. So they can ramp up, and it does force you to play according to how the people want you to play the game. So you can choose the bounties, of course. You can learn how your playgroup plays. For example, in this case, if your playgroup doesn't play enough cards from outside of their hands, perhaps you can play this bounty. I wouldn't say pick this one. But yeah, you can choose how you want your playgroup to play, and you can talk about it. I think this is a really nice mechanic. Next up, we have new mechanics. For example, Saddle. I want to show 1 card from each one, and preferably one that is as simple as possible. This one says Saddle 2. This says, tap any number of other creatures you control with total power 2 or more. This mount becomes settled until end of turn. Settle only as a sorcery. Then when it attacks, it gets a bonus. So it gets, in this case, +1 power and +2 toughness, and gains menace until end of turn. This means that you get to attack with a 5/5, which will be really good in draft, especially since it has menace as well. Then we have a mechanic which is the Outlaws. Whenever an outlaw you control dies, it says in the second line, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. And Outlaws will be assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues and warlocks. So everyone that is a criminal basically counts as an outlaw and will count towards this overarching creature type. Then we have plot, which is a little bit complicated as well. It says you may pay 4, so it says the plot cost here, and exile this card from your hand. Cast it as a sorcery on the turn later without paying its mana cost. Plot only as a sorcery. This means that later you can play a card for free, but your opponents do see them coming. So I do feel like there is a little bit of a downside on it, because your opponents can know that something for mana is coming and they need to prepare, and it's a little bit more obvious, so they know what's coming. But I think it's really a fun way to make these cards a little bit more strong as well. And it really feels like you are planning a heist, for example, here. Then another heist, the Great Train Heist. This one does really well at explaining the spree ability. Most spree cards, or all that I have seen, start with 1 mana. I think always colored mana, so in this case red. And then you can choose a few abilities. In this case, you have 3. So that means that you can choose either this one, or this one. For example, choosing an opponent whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to the player this turn. Create a tapped treasure. That's one ability you can choose. Or you can choose that, plus giving your creatures +1 power and first strike, so you can get in easier. Or you can choose all of them, so 3, 2, 1, 6 mana, +1 is 7. Which means you get an additional combat phase, so that probably you will be wanting to kill your opponent in that case. Maybe in this case you want to do more chip damage. There are a lot of ways to play these, and in this case you have 1, 2, 3 choices you can play. You can choose combinations of 1, 2, 3 combinations, that's already 6 abilities. Or you can choose them all, which is a 7th. So there are a lot of choices in these cards, which make them really interesting. And then we have the crime, which is to target anything from your opponent, anything they control, your opponents themselves, or the cards in their graveyards also count. As long as you target them, you get to do something. For example, whenever you commit a crime, target creature you control gains your choice of menace or lifelink, so one of the two until end of turn. Of course, you can give a creature menace and lifelink in this case, when you target multiple things from your opponents. Because this can get really strong, a lot of cards have the clause on it that you only get to do this once a turn. Then we will go on to limited play. I think these cards will be really good in limited, because for example this one is a destroy target creature card. So I think, remember it's 4 mana to destroy something, but you could get some upside on top of that. Then there's this one, which you can plot for 3. Then you can play it on a later turn as a sorcery, but you also get to return an instant or sorcery then. So that means that for free you get to play a 2/3, which is already a pretty decent body, but then you get to return an instant or sorcery, playing a double, and definitely if this is a strong one, this will be really strong and limited. Another uncommon, which will be a really good removal piece, says deal 5 damage to target creature for just 2 mana. It is a sorcery and it does need to be in a dedicated red deck. And then I have this theme, which is 1 of 8. I think these cards can go in some of the top 8 decks that we have seen. or at least some really good standard decks. Mono red is a really good standard deck at this moment for the lower rates, so I think this can go into standard at least. It's a 2 mana 1/2 with flying and haste. There are a lot of 1 mana creatures that have flying and haste as well. I think you've seen the chick that goes in really quickly. But this one also says when you cast a non-creature spell, it gets 2 extra power. And this deck loves to play its 1 mana instance. So this will be really strong for that deck. I don't really think you will be looking at the plot even for this. Form a Posse is a 2 mana and X sorcery that I think goes really well into Boros Convoke. This one says create X 1/1s, which is really the only thing you will look at. Because those small creatures can really quickly convoke more cards into the battlefield. Then I have some thematicals, which will get more logical in the future. But here we see the theme of deserts. There are 10 desert lands with all sorts of jewel-colored combinations, and all of them say when they enter tapped, and they deal 1 damage to target opponent. And they have a lot of cool flavored text from the Pioneer Journal of Big Ralph. They all say something about the lands, for example that the cacti have it right to always carry some water. They learn new stuff about it, don't touch the swamps for example, and don't trust every piece of water because some of them can be fake. Of course, deserts are really important to a cowboy set. Now, we have power creep, just 1 this time. This Trained Earrings is a 3/1 for 2, and I will look for these cards at the previous revealed card if it has the same color and the same power and toughness, and I think it's better, I will show them together. So Trained Earrings is a 2 mana 3/1 that says it gets first strike when it attacks and you have settled it. You do need 2 power to do this, but I think it's better than needing the celebration, which can be which will need you to be very dedicated in your deck, and giving it and making it become a 3/3 because power is better than defense. This is not a very obvious one, but I think we will get some fun examples from this. Then I have Meta Mechanical, which says, is about a change in the use of a mechanic that we have explained before. So, for example, the settle mechanic can be used to do something with the creature that has settled it. So, like we saw with the Kidrock as well, in a way, sacrificing it. But this one is, well, good for the creature. Fortune is a loyal steed. So this one says at the end of combat, exile it and up to 1 target creature. So you exile Fortune, making it come back, and scry 2 again. But then another creature can be exiled and returned to the battlefield as well. So that you can get, of course, the enter the battlefield effect again. I think this is really strong. You do need to attack with it, of course. But it's a 2/4, so probably you will be able to attack once or twice. Then I have the Artist's Lane Swap. There are a lot of set items here, which is about an artist that has really changed up their work. Here, for example, we see very dark themes, and the Armored Armadillo is a really hopeful theme, I would say, because we see the light coming in. It's a really fun play from Kellen saying he wanted to ride a slow cannonball with legs. And I think the darkness is still coming through because it does seem a little bit dangerous. But I think it's also fun that the Untucker moved on to something more hopeful. Maybe we'll see more of that in the future. And then I have the last one, Silliness, which is about things that are funny, like holy cow, of course. And now for your gift. Here you go. Release me, release my magic cards, 'cause the previous set was only 2 months ago.